Shabbat Shalom and greetings to you all. Welcome to our annual reading of the Book of Esther. Now, as is usual, I'm going to do it a little bit differently, as I tend to do just about all of our services. Now, this marks a very special celebration. It seems our world and our lives are driven by celebrations of all different kinds. Celebrating gives us a sense of achievement, and it's a great way of rewarding ourselves for a job well done. Many celebrations are the product of tradition and become traditions. Tradition contributes a sense of comfort and belonging. Tradition reinforces values such as freedom, faith, integrity, good education, personal responsibility, a strong work ethic, and the value of being selfless. Tradition provides a forum to showcase role models and celebrate the things that really matter in life. Now, when we commemorate a special occasion, we're essentially placing a mental bookmark on an experience, thereby making it easier to remember in the future. We'll use photos, videos, other forms of memorabilia from those occasions to serve as triggers that we can use to relive those pleasant experiences in the future. On the larger scale, we celebrate festivals or holidays that tend to center around religious reasons. Now, those are the ones designed to bring people together and create a sense of belonging in the community. And that's different from the ones that are like the personal ones, like birthdays and anniversaries, which are just family-oriented. The community ones are when people from all walks of life come together to celebrate a common item. These are the festivals that teach us to forget enmity and embrace one another in a bond of love and culture of harmony, as we do when we gather each week in our celebrations. Now, these are the times that we can forget the chaos of life and embrace good hopes and the hard work that's done. Now, this festival that we're celebrating now, and this reading of the biblical Book of Esther, it's only one of two biblical books named for women. The other, of course, is the Book of Ruth, and both are extremely incredible stories of perseverance, love, and spirit. This is a story in which many of the characters we read about are real, but we do not know how true the story is. All stories have some form of embellishment. It doesn't matter because it symbolizes the unconquerable soul and spirit of a meek hearer, and of a people who cannot be destroyed. It reminds us we never know what's going to happen. Recent history, current events tell you that. The unexpected can be around any corner. It gives us the great reminder that we never need succumb to or adopt fear, and that we as individuals and as a group can never be destroyed. We're all the descendants of the people in this story because it is about people who have struggled with faith and belief, but still hold fast to some kind of belief in a power beyond our own. Now, while we know that many of the characters in the story are historic characters, like most ancient stories, it's part fable, part history, but we love when history comes alive. It's special to us. The story of Esther takes place around the same time as the 300 Spartans took place. That great historical battle at the Pass of Thermopylae, which was about 480 years before the Common Era. This holiday is considered one of the minor holidays that's celebrated, and minor holidays simply mean holidays added subsequent to the writing of the Torah, with the major holidays being only those ones that are listed in the Torah. Now, the two most important minor holidays are perhaps the most celebrated of all the holidays, and are both miracle stories. We all love miracles. And this one occurred about 300 years before the miracle festival that we celebrate each year, the miracle of Hanukkah, the story of rededication. Now, from a historical perspective, the Megillat Esther, Book of Esther, was the last of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible to be canonized by the sages of the Great Assembly. Now, that was a holy council of about 120 scribes, sages, prophets from the Second Temple period, comprised of some of the greatest scholars of the time: Zechariah, Ezra, Daniel, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel. It's a veritable who's who of Second Temple biblical lore. And while we do not know for certain, it is believed it was they who introduced the Feast of Purim to the established holy days of the calendar. And and set it up to be done on an annual basis. Now, according to the Talmud, this book was a redaction, and a redaction is an edit of an original text by Mordechai, who happens to be one of the chief characters in the story, and they date it to around the 4th century before the Common Era, which actually fits with the days of Xerxes I, who came to the throne in 486 before the Common Era. It, like so much of the Torah, seems to have been edited from all these different stories, and like many great ancient writings, there are Greek versions, Hebrew versions, Latin versions. There's Coptic and even Ethiopian versions. Each are slightly different. And so there is no one simple Book of Esther, and there is no unedited version. Now, like all good stories going back to the first written story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, to our latest modern tales, there is a hero and a heroine, our protagonists. Faced with a conflict they must resolve, and there is an antagonist, the obstacle to be overcome. And our characters' names are not Hebrew, but Babylonian. The story as we know it comes from the time of the first exile in Babylon, which resulted in much cross-cultural pollination. The calendar's the same, the name's the same. Many of the stories are the same. In ancient times, there was a system in place to get instant credibility for one's writings. Ascribe it to someone famous. Now, one of the most famous ancient books is called the Book of Formation. It's a cornerstone of early Kabbalistic teaching, and of course it's attributed to Abraham. It's highly unlikely that someone unearthed Abraham's ancient manuscript. But by calling it the Book of Abraham, gave instant credibility to the work. Now, this here is a story believed to have been written by the participant Mordechai, and so it is given greater credence, and there was a rabbinic determination that everyone is obligated to listen to a live recording of the Megillah on Purim. Some do, most do not. It's read in Hebrew. Some understand it, but most do not. Now, perhaps one of the most interesting things about the book is the Book of Esther is a non-religious diaspora story about and presumably for Jews in the first diaspora during the Persian exile. And it provides an optimistic picture of survival and success in a foreign land. And that is something that's never changed. That is a universal calling for all people, but it happens to be the history of the Jewish people. They thrive in every foreign land they've ever gone to. Now, it's an exciting book of the Bible. It contains all your classic storybook ingredients: a bold, beautiful heroine, shifting love interests, life or death threat to the good guys, a villain you absolutely love to hate, and of course a happy ending. There is suspense and dramatic irony, reversals of fortune, poetic justice. As Stephen Sondheim so wonderfully put it, and Zero Mostel so magnificently sang it, something for everyone. Well, this is a story that has it all. That is, except for God, or at least God's name. So perhaps the most curious thing about the Book of Esther is that God's never mentioned, not even once. How is a book without God put in the Bible, which is supposed to be a book about God? Now, this curious fact has bothered a lot of people throughout history. Some simply classify Esther as a secular book of the Bible. In fact, one eminent Hebrew scholar said that in passing to Esther from the other books of the Tanakh, we fall from heaven to earth. Not only does the name of God not occur in the book, but the point of view is throughout purely secular. The preservation of the Jewish race is such, and its worldly greatness are the objects in which the author's interest is manifestly centered. It must be admitted that the spirit of Esther is not that which prevails generally in the Old Testament. So is that it? Esther is the secular book of the Bible? Or is this interpretation seriously missing something? Could it be that the absence of mentioning God is directly connected to the book's brilliant literary design? Maybe God's apparent absence is actually part of the book's very sophisticated way of talking about God's providence. Perhaps the point is, God's always at work, even when we can't see that work explicitly. And isn't that how life works? Only the wilderness generation saw God every day. We rely on faith that if we need him, her, it, God will be there. So even though the events in this so-called secular story are seemingly random coincidences isolated from divine planning or intervention, the structure by which these events are recounted tell us otherwise. Though God's name's not mentioned, all of the events, the downfall of Vashti and the rise of Esther, Mordecai's discovery of the assassination plot, the short-lived exaltation of Haman, the insomnia of the king, the book read to the king, reminding him of Mordecai's heroics and the exaltation of the Jewish people, reflect the providential design of God's handiwork, moving history towards his redemptive end. In fact, by never mentioning God, simultaneously conveying the events with perfect literary symmetry, the author's making a very profound theological point, showing us that God's providence is at work in everything to save and deliver his people. It's a technique meant to push you, the reader, to explore God's providence even in the darkest moments of history, even in your own darkest moments. It invites you to see how God can and does work in the real moral ambiguity of human history to accomplish his divine purposes. So instead of being secular, Esther pushes us to look at our own lives and consider how God might be actively working behind the scenes, even in the face of great threat or tragedy, to accomplish his good and perfect purposes. We're called to trust in God's providence, even when we can't see it working, don't understand what's happening. The message calls us to deeper levels of faith, where we choose to believe that no matter how horrible things get, God is committed to redeeming his good world and overcoming evil. So we have a book in which God actually appears nowhere, not even by name, and is not even mentioned. So no rules, no prayers, no do's and no don'ts, other than be yourself, your real self, and have fun. And even though you were to be yourself, you dress in costume, because one of the morals of the story is nothing is as it seems. Now, I know people love to call Purim the Jewish Halloween, but it's not. The costumes serve a different purpose. And in this case, it is, as you will see, everything historically expected did not turn out. So remember, what you see can be an illusion. So always be your real self. There is never a mask that any of you need to wear. As is the theme of the event and the theme of celebration, keep in mind that nothing here is what it seems. And the nothing being what it seems starts with the names of the protagonists, Mordecai and Esther. Esther's actual name was not Esther, it was Hadassah, which means myrtle, as in the myrtle tree. This was changed to Ishtar, who was the queen of the gods of Babylon, a fitting name for the wife of the king, and a name everyone would be familiar with. So there was no Esther, and her guardian, who was really her cousin, Mordecai, comes from two words, Marduk, who was king of the Babylonian gods, and Chai, breath, which is a Hebrew emanation of the name of God. And so Marduk Chai became the breath or life of the gods, and in Hebrew would be pronounced Mordecai. Now the name of this holiday comes from gambling, from dice, Purim. Pur was a lot. So a lot was cast to determine a date in which to commit regally approved genocide. The great miracle of the holiday is that the genocide never took place. Now the Reader's Digest version of the story is this. The Persian Empire of the 4th century before the Common Era extended over 127 lands. All the Jews were its subjects. King Ahasuerus, who we know as King Xerxes, had his wife, Queen Vashti, either banished or executed for failing to follow his orders. A beauty pageant was orchestrated to find a new queen, Jewish girl, Esther, found favor in the king's eyes and became the new queen, though she refused to divulge the identity of her nationality. Meanwhile, the anti-Semitic Haman was appointed prime minister of the empire. Mordecai, one of the Jewish leaders and Esther's cousin, refused to bow to Haman. Haman was incensed and convinced the king that he should issue a decree ordering the extermination of all the Jews on the 13th of Adar, the date chosen by the lottery of Pur. There's plots to kill the king, secret machinations, like at any royal court, strict rules of etiquette, such as not appearing before the king unless being summoned, special events, entertainment. Now, knowing what was coming, Mordecai spurred all the Jews on, convincing them to repent, fast, and pray to God. Meanwhile, Esther asked the king and Haman to join her for a special private feast. At the feast, Esther revealed to the king her Jewish identity and that Haman was going to have her killed. She made it look like he was soliciting her behind the king's back. Haman was hanged. Mordecai was appointed prime minister, and because a kingly decree could not be rescinded, a new decree was issued granting the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies. That sums it up in a very fast period of time. So, let's take a look at the lessons that are contained in this fantastic biblical reading. First of all, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. You never know when you will be called. So listen for the word of God. Beauty should not make us boastful. Esther was beautiful, underwent an entire year of preparation for her one night with the king. And while he was enthralled by her beauty, it was her humble spirit that shone through and caused the king to choose her. Third, with God's help, we can fight our fears. When you're faced with something scary, do as Esther did. Pray, fast, and then bravely face your fears. She used this as her own formula, as we saw her do this when first approaching the king, even though it was forbidden. And we all develop our own formulas for how we want to do things. Our past doesn't dictate our future. No matter where we come from, where we live, or the mistakes we've made, we can put all that in the past and we can move confidently forward knowing God has plans for us, for hope and for a future. God places mentors in our life to teach us wisdom. Now, Mordecai proved to be a wonderful mentor and parent to Esther. He gave her good advice before she went to the palace with the other virgins, especially don't share that you're Jewish. And he continued to give her advice after she became queen. He was also very loyal. He went to Esther when he uncovered the plot of the guards to murder the king, and when he learned of the plan to kill all the Jews, he asked Esther to go before the king. And we now know that this timely advice from her trusted advisor saved the nation. Couldn't know it at the time. All of us need mentors in our lives. They will advise, correct, and at times even rebuke us. God places these special people in our lives to raise up the next generation and help them follow. And we often encounter them. We call them angels. Our strength does not necessarily come from us. When Esther was reminded that she may have been made queen for such a time as this, she drew on strength she didn't know she had to save her fellow Jews. But that strength was not her own. Her strength came from God. She fasted and prayed and drew on the supernatural strength from God to approach the king and save a nation. When you feel weak, when life's struggles seem overwhelming, and you feel like you just can't do it, that's when we don't give in. We often turn things over to God, the universe, the Great Spirit, whatever name you like, and we let Him fight our battles. God's timing is perfect. Ours is not. We often jump in and do something when the wiser course of action is wait and see. When we develop the ability to put greater trust that things work out the way they are supposed to, they do. We often get in our own way. When Esther learned of Haman's plan, she didn't rush to tell the king. She waited for the right time. She was inspired on how best to do it. She fasted, she prayed, she waited. And while she did, Xerxes couldn't sleep, and he got up and he read the Book of Chronicles. And in reading it, he was reminded how Mordecai saved him, and he chose to honor him for it. That might have been the opening in the door to allow events to unfold and the people to be saved. Perhaps God kept the king from sleeping that night. Everything that happens for a reason. Love is the most beautiful thing we can do. Love is the greatest commandment, my friends. Loving God, loving others. Esther knew this in her heart and said, when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. That's in Esther 4:16. She was willing to risk her own life to save the lives of many. Now, while there aren't many of us faced with this type of situation, I believe if the situation was called for, most of us would call on God and be willing to risk our own lives to save others. And finally, we can make an impact for generations. When Esther stepped up and spoke to save the Jewish people, she couldn't have known that she would be impacting generations to come. Her selfless and brave act had been celebrated since that time on. Friends, you will never know how one small act of loving others can make an impact on many. What can you do today which can impact a generation? You may never know, but don't let it stop you. That is what this story of Esther is all about. Now go and listen to or watch to either my recording or someone else's. It's on our channel. Enjoy the story. Be part of its histories. And I will see you all again soon. Shabbat Shalom, blessings to you all, and a fantastic Purim to everybody. Take care. Bye.